I was touching the people in the business. We were talking about things. We were problem solving. We were looking ahead. And that is the way that I built my rhythms. Like every morning we have a call at 8:48, and I typically have a meeting by 9:15. Boom, boom, right out of the gate. I'll do thinking before that, but I have meetings. I'm interacting with people, and I'm touching the business. I'm not sitting looking at my email, because these are things. It's building rhythms in your business that are actually impactful. Touching in a way that was legal,
You
like having a
dirty,
meeting with
dirty,
you,
dirty
perv.
dog.
You dirty, dirty perv.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Mathews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God on the air.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie.
Ian, you son of a bitch.
Frankie.
You busy son of a bitch.
I'm so busy, man. Barely had time to get on today to record with you. It's amazing that two busy guys like us still have time to. I get asked that all the time, like, Ian, you're such a busy guy. How do you have a podcast? How are you able to do it? I got to tell you, it's tough. I'm really busy, Frank.
My incredible coworker.
I just have a great boss, and Frank Cava really helps enable me to do things like record podcasts. It's really important. So we are. I think one of the most annoying things that people can say to me is that they're busy. I tend to not have a lot of respect for it. The people who always tell me they're busy, Frankie, are usually the ones who don't do much. They're usually the employees that would always say that are kind of the ones that weren't really kicking a lot of ass. I think part of the reason why I have that feeling, I had an executive assistant, and I've talked about her on here before. You love it because she used to get yelled at a lot by my boss, but Glenda. And this was probably, I don't know what, this is 2005 when I started working at NBR. And because that president didn't know how to use a computer, she had to read all of his email for him. And, a lot of people use an assistant to kind of scan the email, but truly he didn't have a computer. So her job was a necessary one because the president of a mortgage company gets email all the time. So she would get an email, print it, and run it into his office. And he wanted it within like seconds, just like a president might. My microphone is having problems here, Frank. Just like any president would actually read their emails, he didn't. So she would run it into him, and she did all kinds of other little like stupid stuff that anyone with a computer would know how to do.
Is your microphone worn out because it's too busy?
I have a busy, yes. And I can't even figure out where it's not working here, Frank. You see here, like, this is just great. This is great right here. How's this?
This is it. For those of you listening, Ian's microphone was just tickling that spot between your hairline and your neck. And it was just dangling there. And all you could see was the crown of Ian's head, sadly balding, where if I was doing the same thing, it looked just as bad. But it's like,
God damn.
And I'm often told I'm the bad podcaster.
These are the reasons you should follow Let Me Speak to a Manager on our YouTube channel, because it's way more fascinating than just listening to us assholes. You get to see my microphone falling on my head.
Besides putting this in the show notes, we should definitely have this in our outtakes.
Yes, no doubt about it. But anyway, Glenda did all kinds of garbage. And then our president, who was not real good at technology, left. And Glenda was kind of the only executive assistant left, because when Dwight went to chairman, he quit coming around. So his old assistant, who was mean as a rattlesnake, and she did the same shit that Glenda did for Bill. She didn't do much either, but when he quit coming to the office, she was let go by Paul Seville because he didn't like her. And so Glenda, so now we have a new president, and she's trying to like find work. So our new president's like, hey, Ian, she can be your executive assistant too. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure. So she comes in and she's like, do you want me to read your email? Do you want me to work on your calendar setup? And I'm like, nah, I kind of use my own Outlook. I do all of this stuff. And our new president was the same. He couldn't figure out what to use her for. But she was a sacred cow. She'd been around a long time. She was super nice, super sweet. But all day long, she just was scurrying back and forth in our office, Frank, back and forth. Hey, Glenda, how's it going? And it was always the same. Just busy, busy bees around here, just busy bees. And I'd always think doing what? I know you don't do much for my new boss. You don't do anything for me. And she would print these like old reports that no one read anymore and drop them on our desks. And unfortunately, the next president came in wasn't so nice. It was like, what does she do all day? I don't need her, real quick. But she was no longer useful because her whole position was created because of someone else's lack of technology competence. And she wasn't productive. So she leaned in on busy. So she just scurried around all day, never wanted to be seen sitting still. And I always have thought of her, whenever anyone says busy to me, it's kind of ruined that word. Because when she would say busy, it always made me think bullshit. You're not doing anything. We're wasting money with you. But she didn't really report to me. So I didn't have to make that decision. Someone else did. But I kind of always think about people that tell me they're busy all the time as Glenda.
So my first introduction to busyness and the negative association with it was this. It's 2008. We're going through a downturn. And I used to have a staff of 75 people. We're down to 23. And someone in corporate called us up and they were like, they wanted us to do something at the time. I was like, this is so stupid. Or they wanted me to go down to like half of a manager. And I remember thinking like, God, they're out of touch. And their quote was, you're closing 14 houses a month. What are you so busy doing? And as a young person, I was pissed because I was like, screw them. They're insensitive. They don't understand it. But there's been a change. Now, when someone tells me how busy they are, it's my money at risk. And literally, like, we're closing like 17 deals a month with 40 people. And I hear how busy everyone is. And I was like, with what? Like, my staff is going through leadership essentials with you right now. And the reason they're doing that is because I want them to fine tune what they're spending their time on. And what I think people do a lot of is they major in minor stuff. And it's a big deal. Like they go for the dopamine hit, they go for the low-hanging fruit, we can explain the boxes, they go to the wrong box, they spend their time on the wrong things, and they are busy, but they're not productive and they're not moving the needle. And I think it's pervasive, and there's a currency to busyness that we reward in a society that I don't think we should.
I love that line, Frank, that they major in minor stuff. Because I think too many people equate activity with production. And I think busyness, it's a symbol of status in the United States. I mean, I feel like, I feel like it always has been. Americans don't vacation like Europeans, like other parts of the world. They don't take time off for maternity, for paternity. They don't, like, we want to be seen as busy. We want to be seen as productive. And I'm all for being productive. I mean, I'm not here to argue for idle time. But pop culture, Gordon Gekko, famous line, money never sleeps.
Gordon Gekko, for those of you that don't know, Wall Street, famous 80s movie. Go.
Fantastic movie. If you're a follower of this show, you know that movie. But Money Never Sleeps. That's kind of his big, he calls Bud at like 5 a.m. on the beach. And he's like, you're working? He's like, money never sleeps, pal. And, that's kind of that we lionize Wall Street. I mean, there's so many movies on Wall Street because it's just so intense and it's so, it's Warren Zevon's famous line, the rocker, I'll sleep when I'm dead. There's a lot of that kind of stuff out there that's part of our culture. And when you think about entrepreneurs, you think about immigrants, Frankie, coming off the boat, Ellis Island, just getting to work right out of the gate and making money in America. That's part of our ethos. Your dad, my father-in-law,
our grandfathers for sure.
they didn't have a lot of choices. So how'd you make money? You grinded, right? Like if you worked on a farm, hours usually equated to money and to eating, right? The more you worked, the more seeds you laid, the more you tended to your crops, the better your crop, the more yield you had, the more you could sell at the local farmer market, the more your family ate. Like I'm not against hard work. And in that world, I think that's noble. I think working hard is noble, but in a gig economy, in a knowledge economy like we have now, just being busy for the sake of it isn't going to make you a hell of a lot of money.
So I think this is really interesting, right? Like I can remember growing up the child of blue collar people and being in a corporate setting and realizing like I'm in a different world. Like we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. And I can remember where I was standing when it happened. Ian, do you know why schools use bells to measure the start of the day, beginning of class, end of a class?
I do not.
You should. It comes from Henry Ford's production line at Ford. And what they would do is they would use a bell to signal things and they trigger us, right? Like to what you were just talking about a second ago, like the bell measures something like time to do this, time to move to this, start, stop, break, whatever. But that's why we use the bell. And they did it in the schools to indoctrinate us to that system. Because when you get out of the school, you move to the factory and they want you to know that when the bell rings, you do something. That's how the whole thing with bells started. But what I remember, the reason I use that analogy quickly was this. We're accustomed to or we're raised for a different world. Technology and society are moving faster than they ever have. And our skills, 200 years ago, nearly 85% of people on this planet farmed. Now that number is under 8%. And because we've evolved, we have technology, but the human body hasn't changed that much. So what I think happens is there is now an idleness to people. What you're talking about with busyness, it trades like a currency. And this is what I remember from being a 25-year-old. I was standing in the kitchen at the Washington West office, and there was a bunch of like admins and mid-level managers who were all gossiping. And what I realize is they are capped on their income because of the roles they're in, where they're going, what their aspirations, whatever it is, but they're capped. There's a ceiling. So what they realize is I can't make this money that I might want. So I'm going to trade in a different currency, and it's gossip. And I used to sit around and used to just bitch. And I remember watching it and being fascinated by it. Being like, this is not like Jerry Seinfeld has a line. He goes, "We are not men." And Costanza goes, "You're right. We're not." Like, this isn't work. This isn't the work that was done 200 years ago, but it's what's become of work. So gossip being a currency is one thing, but so too is busyness. Busyness gives you significance. When I tell someone I'm busy, I'm in the club. I have significance. Look, pay attention to me. I'm so busy. But we're rewarding the wrong things. The gossip culture, the busyness culture, it's the wrong stuff. It's not what you're doing. It's just the fact that you're showing up.
So Frankie, have you heard of a term called effort justification?
I hadn't.
So effort justification, it's a psychological term, social psychology. It's a paradigm that's similar to cognitive dissonance. It's pretty much a person's tendency to attribute the value of effort as greater than the value of the actual outcome.
Right.
Right. So, you ever had a good coach that, you're like, "Hey, we gave it our best today." And the coach is like, "You didn't win. Like, the whole point is to win. Giving your best isn't getting you on the field." And think back, Frank, when you think about, we'll go all the way back to high school football. What did training camp do for most teams? What did two-a-days and hot August practices in I can't imagine what Southern Florida felt like in pads. What did it do for a team?
It was a crucible. It was something that would bring, like, what I think of two-a-days in high school football, what I think about the most is it was absolutely miserable, but I was with my brothers, and it forged a bond, and I wasn't going through this alone. And our football coach was really good at making us all not necessarily hate him, but realize he was the force on the other side, forcing us to all be together, because there was going to be a moment when he needed to flip that switch and he needed us to all work in unison with each other. And he just pushed us so damn hard that we just had to work together.
Yeah. Wait, and you're a Kenny Chesney guy. What's the famous
Boys of
line
Fall.
in Boys of Fall?
So the song, it's called The Boys of Fall, Kenny Chesney. They didn't just let anybody in that club, took every ounce of heart and sweat and blood to get to wear those game day jerseys down the hall. Kings of the school, man, we were the boys of fall.
Yeah, so I love that line. That line's
It's a great line.
fantastic, right? And
The line about wearing the jersey down the hall, like if you ever played a sport, you got to wear your jersey on Friday, and it was the coolest thing. Like I literally remember getting a job, going into my senior year of high school and thinking about like, all right, I need to buy clothes. That was my responsibility. I'm like, I only need to buy 4 shirts because on Friday I get to wear my jersey.
Yeah. I mean, as a freshman, that's all I ever wanted was to wear a varsity football and baseball jersey. Is looking up at the seniors and all that. But you got to pay a price to get into it, and so a lot of people they justify. But when it comes to work, it's not the greatest. It's not the greatest idea. But a lot of people will stay with a company because it grinds them so hard. So there's, if you think about, I'll go back to just the Wall Street ethos, right? Which is work 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. And a lot of people in their mind are like, well, not everyone can get in this club. Not everyone can get in this club and work at some hedge fund or private equity firm where, because people don't have the same tolerance for pain that I do, that I'm able to go put in more time and effort than the average bear. That doesn't mean that you're not being productive working 7 days, 16 hours a day. I'm just here to tell you that at least 30 of those hours are a waste because your brain's not working as well. So I don't know what you're doing for some of those hours, but a lot of people, they justify it. It's no different than going through, I went through a fraternity at college. Pledgeship is brutal. You're chewed out, you're kept up all night, you're hazed all the friggin' time. But getting in, like when people got in, there was a different respect you had for people that they came in. So there's a lot of this is just part of our culture in America of feeling that pride of not everyone can go through this kind of a grind, even though we're not all being that productive. It wasn't terribly productive to go through pledgeship and get hazed. It's not a terribly great thing, but there was a different kind of respect you had for it once you got through it.
Speaking of effort justification, Ian, I just thought of something. Have you ever heard of the term NEPS?
No.
NEPS. You never heard of it?
What is the term NEPS?
So NEPS is basically for people of nepotism, or like people who have risen up through the ranks because of an unfair advantage that society puts on them, right? Like one of Barack Obama's kids was an example of a NEP when I read this. I never heard it, right? But there was a justification, like a juxtaposition against NEPs. Do you know in 2022 what 93 of the top 100 TV shows were?
Reality TV shows?
Sporting events.
Oh.
Sporting events. Super Bowl, clearly, playoff games, a lot of football.
Sure.
But the argument that I heard was this. The reason that sports is so incredibly popular is because it's the last place where there is a brutal meritocracy. The only people who make it are the ones who have the merit and have earned it. And society, our society, I mean, around the globe, tune into it. Think about what's happening right now with soccer, right? Like in the UAE, they're literally spending $250 million to lure. They're about to lure Messi there. They just got Ronaldo not too long ago for like a quarter of a billion. So it's so attractive in the world to have sports because it's the last place where it comes down to no BS. You can't just be busy in sports. You better be good or you're going to be cut. And it's why society responds so incredibly well to it.
And hasn't it been fascinating to you how Kobe Bryant's brand has changed so much after
he
his
died.
career, not just since he died, but after his career, really.
Yeah.
When he was playing, especially the last few years, a lot of people didn't like Kobe because he was prickly. He, wasn't always thought of as a great teammate. You were kind of a Lakers fan, or you weren't really a Kobe fan because he rubbed people the wrong way. He wasn't always the best teammate. But after the fact, his brand took off with the whole Mamba mentality. People started hearing the stories about how many hours a day he put into his craft, talking about 10, 12-hour days on the gym floor, 3 different sessions, the way he ate, the work. So we lionize folks that do that kind of stuff. And look, when it comes to sports, that worked. That absolutely worked. I think, but all of that starts to seep into office jobs too, where you see, well, okay, that's what society values a guy like Kobe who just outgrinds everybody and has massive success. So even if I'm just like an accountant, I think, well, that's what society values. So I should just grind lots of hours, even though I might not have a lot of work to do. I'm going to just put more time in and be seen as busy because that's what society values.
So I think what happens is we were having a conversation before we hit the record button. We were talking about interviewing. And what we talked about in the interview is the STAR, right? The situation, the task, the action, and the result. And if you're not a good interviewer, you get buffaloed by people because you don't go after those things. But it's no different for a really good employee. Like I had someone call me up this morning and he wants to meet with me, and someone who works here. And he's like, I need more time with you. And I said, okay, let me tell you how to get more time with me. Add more value to the company. And he goes, how's that going to get me more? How's that going to get me more of your face time? I said, because if you become more valuable to the company, you're going to make it into more meetings that I'm in. And you're going to have more time to rub shoulders with me because you're making the company more money. You're making us more valuable. You're making us a better business, a better brand. And that's what you need to do. And he goes, well, how do I do that? I said, what are you working on? He explained it. I said, what were you working on 2 years ago? And the answer is smaller projects. I'm like, you're doing it. It doesn't feel like you're doing it because you're grinding your way through it, but you're absolutely 100% doing it. You're getting bigger opportunities. You're building $1 million house instead of $100,000 house. That's because we trust you and we know you can do these things. But it does, like many people just, they lose sight of that and you get caught in other emotions. But that is what society does. It rewards you in ways that are more work. If you're a good producer, we lean into you. If you're someone who finds yourself kind of stalled, you're probably focusing on the wrong things. You need to ask yourself, am I asking the right questions? Am I talking to the right people? Am I seeking the right feedback? Am I guiding myself properly through this process? Or am I just busy?
Frank, I'll ask you this. When you were younger, did you feel like, when you were really busy, did you feel like you were more valuable when you were younger versus now? Because I did. When I was younger, I thought about being busy as, wow, I must be really important to my company if I'm this busy and they trust me with all this stuff. I thought about it differently than I think about busyness today.
So I'm going to answer this question a little bit differently. As a dad, I want to instill a hard work ethic in my children, but I'm old. I'm 48 with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, right? Like I'm to a point in my life where I could probably afford to be less busy, but I'm a little bit scared I'm going to set the wrong precedence with my kids, because if I'm not busy, what are they going to think dad's doing, right? And I'm going to tee this up for you in a second. When I was a kid, there was a guy with very old parents whose parents were retired. And I always thought that kid was soft. He was like 6'7". He was on our football team. He did not have the work ethic. If he had the work ethic that we had, he would have, you'd know his name. He would have gone to college. He had the skills. He just didn't have the work ethic.
Yep.
But his parents were retired. It always scares the crap out of me when I think about that kid. And I'm like, I can't be idle because my kids are going to see somebody who's idle. Now, what I respect very much about you is I think you do smart work. Your kids know you work hard, but you do it in a way that you're not at the mine. You're not doing 70 hours a week anymore. It's a very different type of work. But I think I think there is a fear that I think our society does reward hard work, and some people don't know how to do the right thing. So like, I'm just going to be busy to set an example. I think it's complicated.
Well, I'll tell you, Frank, I was busy, I guess, for 20 years. I would just say I worked a lot of hours. I would never really consider myself a busy person. I consider myself really productive. I got a lot of shit done, and I was asked to do a lot. And then I started my own thing, and I went from being like 16 hours a day traveling a lot to didn't have anything going on. It drove me nuts. I went kind of whole hog into this thing, and there's not a lot to do. So I even in the beginning tried to keep myself busy doing things, right? Wasn't all, a lot of it didn't generate much money, but this year, and you and I have been talking about this a lot, this year, through a confluence of events of a lot of the like gigs that I've got going on, I just have a lot spiking all at once. And over the last 60 days, I've been really irritated because I've been busy. Like, I feel like a lot of it's busy work where now when I'm busy, I don't feel like, oh, I'm so productive. Now I'm annoyed. Like, and when I really study it, Frank, there's some bad habits in there. There's some things that I've held on to that I need to let go of. And I need to just delegate or find an employee or do something different because my opportunities have gone up a lot this year for whatever reason. And I'm still trying to do it the way I used to. So I need to figure out, where am I spending my time in areas that I could probably farm out or find someone else to do in different areas. And it's also kind of forced me to quit doing some things I was doing that weren't generating a lot of money. So, you know, I'm not writing for certain publications anymore. I'm not writing my blog. I've kind of given up some things that just weren't productive, but they kept me busy. But now being in my 40s, I get really annoyed when I'm really busy because I know that that's probably sloppiness on my part and it's probably bad habits. It's not, oh, you're busy, so that means you're doing a great job. Well, how much more money are you making? Well, if it's a lot more, okay, but what are my trade-offs?
So I've been doing this for so long at this point, like I almost can't remember what it was like on the other side of it. But when I realized I was better at managing my schedule than other people, my life changed drastically. And what I realized was this, is people who weren't as successful as me, people didn't have the resources, the company, however you want to measure it, they were often trying to dictate their schedules on me. And I remember putting my foot down and saying, no, here are the windows of time that I will meet with you, or here are the times that we're going to do this, or this is how we're going to do this. I get made fun of for being a control freak. Okay. In some ways, perhaps, but that is the way that I've elevated myself, is I say no to a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And you have to do it on my terms. You have to bring it to me these ways because I have a ton of demands. I mean, the numbers of emails I get, phone calls, texts, there's constant distractions that don't move the needle.
Have you ever stopped to see, Frankie, when you get the majority of your emails? Have you ever just kind of considered it? Because you get a lot of emails, I know, but have you ever noticed when your influxes are?
So we're leading into a 3-day, 4-day holiday weekend. I know they're going to stop over the next couple of days because most people are off.
Yeah.
I know. I can tell you when I don't get emails, 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Like, you usually get them when people are at work, and
what time in particular do you normally get a whole bunch of influx?
Whatever, 15 minutes after someone gets to work.
Yes, you're nailing it. So in my experience, I think like 80-90% of people come into the office, they bullshit for 15 minutes with people in the office, take a while to get their coffee, settle in. The first thing 80% of people do is turn on their Outlook and see what emails came from the time they left yesterday, and they scroll up and down and they reply and they forward and they read and they send a few extras out. I would say the average person probably blows the first 90 minutes of their day just glaring into Outlook. And when I talk to people about time management, and I work mainly with managers, and managers are no different. Managers maybe even worse than real workers, frontline workers on this.
Right.
The question I always ask is, do you think your inbox is your to-do list? Or is it a collection of other people's to-do lists? Them just pounding out tasks onto you that maybe they could be doing themselves. And when they think about it that way, it's never their to-do list. That your inbox is not your priority list. Unless you sent the email to yourself to go do something, it's someone else's priority list, and they're trying to get you to do some work. And so people that focus all of their time, that start every day with 90 minutes in their Outlook, these are busyness people. These are not productive individuals. These are people that don't know how to build their own priorities for the day, that don't know how to build a to-do list that's productive for the company, for themselves, for their own wealth. These are people that are just at the whim of other people that chase around a bunch of requests and other things. And it's scary just how many people literally do exactly what I'm saying. Just spend the first 90 minutes of the day idly staring at their Outlook.
So when you get into busyness and you get into schedule, there's two different things, right? Let's talk about employees first and busyness. So what Ian just talked about is when you're an employee and you have a boss, which everybody who works here reports to me in some way or another. What I tell people is this: I do not get into my email that often. I have someone who checks it. And if you send me an email, call me if you need me to look at it soon or if it's urgent. And we had a meeting yesterday and I hadn't seen an email that was sent on Thursday and it was end of day Tuesday. And I said, well, is it urgent? And he said, well, I really like an answer. I said, well, then you should have also called me, because I don't sit and look at my email. I'll go 3-4 days without opening my email because my email doesn't make me any money. It doesn't keep the company ahead. It's just a mechanism for us to have a conversation because you didn't want to walk down the hall or pick up the phone. So that's one thing. If you are an entrepreneur and you're looking to get away from the busyness trap, and I am an entrepreneur who is looking to get away from it, what did I do? When I was in the loop of, I was really slow and then I got really busy with a bunch of tasks that didn't really move the needle, I actually did some kind of crazy things that most people probably would say are stupid, but they worked for me. I hired a couple people because then I was beholden to others and I knew that I had to produce in order for these people to remain employed. And that was leverage for me.
Not just produce. So that's a big one, is I got to bring in revenue because now I have a cost line item. So not only am I bringing in revenue to just kind of keep for myself, I have to cover their costs now. I have to bring in twice the revenue just to cover the cost. But the second big thing about that, Frank, that I love that you brought up is you look like an asshole if you hire someone and they don't have anything to do. So you're like, it sounds strange, but when you hire someone, even though you're really busy, it takes a lot of managers a long time to give things up they were doing beforehand. And when you got them there and you know they're bored, it forces you to delegate things, show them, here's how I do this, here's what I do, I need you to take this off me, here's the outcome I need, here's when I need it by, because it's a lot of work to delegate. But if you hire someone, they're going to be looking at you like, do you really want to pay me today? Because, hey, boss, I didn't do anything. Like, you haven't given me enough work. So it forces you to push off busy work off of yours and give it to someone who's at a lower pay grade that you brought in to help you with.
The other thing I did was I set meetings early in the morning with agendas on certain days of the week. Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, I'll had early morning meetings, 8:30 to 9 o'clock. Now, at the point of my life when I started this, I was staying up way later. I didn't have kids. Like, getting out of the house early in the morning was harder for me. But most normal human beings are productive between 9 and 5. That's what your offer letter says, or 8 to 5, 8 to 4. Yeah. So what I would do is I set meetings with an agenda, and it was the first thing in the morning. So because I didn't want people slow or lazy or like not having enough work, there was a weekly rhythm. It was their job to fill up the rhythms of the meetings with the things that they needed. And then the first thing in my day was the most important meeting of my day. So I didn't run into the office and immediately look at email. I went right into a meeting room. Like, often I'd skip my office and go right to the conference room because that was way more important than anything that was sitting in my inbox. I was touching the people in the business. We were talking about things. We were problem solving. We were looking ahead. And that is the way that I built my rhythms. Like every morning we have a call at 8:48 and I typically have a meeting by 9:15. Boom, boom, right out of the gate. I'll do thinking before that, but I have meetings. I'm interacting with people and I'm touching the business. I'm not sitting looking at my email, because these are things, it's building rhythms in your business that are actually impactful. Touching in a way that was legal,
You
like
dirty,
having a meeting
dirty,
with
dirty
perv.
dog.
You dirty perv.
What Frank's talking about there, you start with the big things, get them out of the way in the day, and then whatever fell into your email you get to later in the day, you at least will feel productive if you get into some of this. So part of what's behind this, we talked about one psychological phenomena, which is effort justification. Another one that I find equally interesting is idleness aversion. So all this basically says is that humans cannot stand idleness. It's like if you just left someone in a room, the worst thing you can do to someone in prison is put them in solitary confinement. So solitary confinement is what it sounds like. You sit in a room and you have nothing. You have no light, nothing. You just sit. And it's the worst thing you could do to someone in prison. And a psychologist, Timothy Wilson, he found that 67% of men and 25% of women, they did a social experiment. 67 and 25% chose to press a button that gave them an electrical shock rather than sit still with their own thoughts in a lab room. So they put them in a lab room and they said, you can either just sit here and think for several hours, or if you push this button, you'll get shocked. And they got so bored, they couldn't just stand there with their own thoughts, that they started shocking themselves. 2/3 of the men would rather give themselves an uncomfortable electrical shock than sit there and think. And that's an explanation of the idleness aversion. You're on mute there, big guy.
Yeah, it happens.
This is great TV, Frank.
Are you the guy that scratched the back of your neck with the microphone to start this podcast?
I might be.
Production value was high.
Yes.
So when I learned of the idleness aversion, I thought of something very different. I thought of your iPhone and how much time it traps you in. Like, I have a harder time reading books now because most of what I consume, I read on my phone. I read the Wall Street Journal on my phone. I read ESPN on my phone. I read all these things on my phone. It's just more active for your brain. So I thought this was really interesting. According to a recent study published in the journal Behavioral Addictions, using your phone in between important tasks decreases your ability to focus. The findings suggest that it's best to try not to look at your phone while doing things that require your full attention. And they joke, such as projects or riding your bike, like you're doing two things at once, right? So like there's what you led with being in solitary confinement and people literally wanting to give themselves shocks because they're sitting there for too long. And then we're built to not have the ability to actually work our way through things because of our phones. Our phones get us constantly addicted to just doing things that are for busyness. Like, you can't do this. I do. I've got 40-ish people working here. How often do you think I walk around the office and I see people in some social media outlet, either on their phone? Like it's constant. Like you've told me yourself, like what you do when you really want to focus, especially when you were writing a lot, is you put blocks on your phone or your email. So it's like you couldn't be interrupted because you needed that space to do things and produce.
Worse, I would leave it in my truck,
right,
in the parking lot. Like it's when I needed to really write something and hunker down. And when I was building my management program, Frankie, 100% this happened. I would leave my phone in my car and I would tell Jenny, hey, you're not going to be able to get a hold of me until about 2 because I'm leaving my phone in my truck. I need about 6 hours where I can just jam. I'm just going to be on my computer. I'm writing, I'm building slides, I'm putting something together, I'm studying. I couldn't have my phone there because it would take me 5 times as long to build the same 20-minute lesson. I just couldn't do it.
So I want to interrupt before we get on to the next one and just say this quickly. Busyness is a trap that everyone can fall into. The only like we're going to get into next, we're going to talk about what managers can do about this. You are the one who's in control of your destiny. No one told Ian to leave his phone in his truck. He decided to do it. No one told me to put meetings to the front of my day. I decided to do it. You have to be the arbiter of your own time, and you have to be the arbiter of your own production. And it's very hard to measure these things, but you have to have an incredible amount of determination to do it, and you have to be mindful of it, or what will happen is society, your phone, other distractions will swallow you up.
We can't stand to be idle. I mean, managers were freaked out all around the world when COVID-19 happened and everyone was at home, that people from home were going to work less and be less productive. And all the studies showed they all worked more hours. And the reason they worked more hours, they're bored as hell at home. So they would just be on their computer. But the problem is, was that work productive? Or was it just people creating more bullshit Zoom meetings? I mean, you and I never went through this. One, because you didn't really let people work from home, which was genius. And we didn't at Keep either. But the other piece that you didn't go through this, you don't love meetings. But I knew a ton of people where I'd be like, what'd you do today? And they'd be like, I was in 9 Zoom meetings. And I'd be like, wow, that's a pretty wild day. They're like, no, that's every day. There's so many people just got logged into Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting all day. But that was idleness aversion. That was just people creating stuff on their calendar to make themselves feel this is better than not doing anything. But how productive was it? I would argue that a ton of unnecessary work was generated during COVID-19, which is why I think most companies today are overstaffed, because there's a lot of people doing unnecessary tasks. So let's get into, Frank, if you're a manager or if you're someone who struggles with this, what can you do? I think one of the first things you can do is reward output and not activity. So commission salespeople are my favorite example of this.
Yep.
Well, full commission salespeople, hey, buddy, screw around all you want all day. I'm not paying you. Like, you get paid by the sales you bring in. Realtors, you can clown, you can mess around on social media all day. You can do whatever you want. You're not going to make shit. So commission salespeople are good examples. I'll use us as an example after we record this. Frank and we're talking to a different social media marketing firm. And the reason why we're talking to a different one, Frank and I haven't put a ton of time into our social media. We've outsourced it. So we pay a monthly fee and we're getting what we asked for, which is they just drop a whole bunch of posts all over our social media.
We're getting exactly what we asked for.
We're getting exactly what we asked for. They just post a bunch of shit and no one engages. And what they post is also, it has no rhyme or reason. It's not produced too well, but it's also kind of cut up wrong. It's not really cut up with full thoughts. And so it's actually doing us more harm than good spending this money, but we're paying them for output. We're paying them for activity, not output. If we were paying them based on engagement, based on growing our following, if we made them like an owner like us, like gave them some metrics that we would like to get out of our money, and that's what we're talking to this next person about, we want to pay him to think like we would, which is we want to grow the following of this podcast. We want to grow our viewership. We want to grow our engagement back and forth with us. If that's what we pay for, I think we're going to get a better result.
For sure. There's a few ways you can do this, right? Salespeople are the easiest by far, but almost a little bit over half of my company is wedded to monthly, quarterly, and annual results. Because if you do it that way, then everybody wins and everybody's kind of rowing the same direction. Some things are broken. They're always going to be broken. But at the same time, if you set up the comp structure that way, it's the easiest way to do it. The thing that I think so why doesn't everybody compensate people based upon results? Because it's harder to build the offer letter and it's harder to manage. It's much, much, much harder.
Yeah.
So like you can simply just
you need good reporting. You need a very objective metrics, KRAs.
It's way harder.
Specifics.
So what most people do is they're going to just pay you an hourly fee or pay you or an hourly wage or pay you a salary. And you're like, well, they're doing good work. And when you go behind them, you realize they're just busy. but it requires a higher level of detail and a higher level of analytics to be able to put that in place. And then you got to stick to it. And so most people don't do it because it's hard.
So there's this concept also of deep work, right? Where you get into that flow state. And a lot of people, there've been a lot of studies done on this where you need to really be into something for 30, 45 minutes to get into a real flow. And I talked about flow work just earlier. So for me, flow work would be building a new program. I had one of my customers ask me to put together a recruiting and hiring program. I have some of the materials that are in my management class, Frank, but I never put just a course just together for this. It's another example of I took the order before I had the program, and then I had to go build it, but I had a deadline. So it's another example. I left my phone in my car. I left all of the distractions I could have, and I scheduled that time. I did the same thing as an executive. I always, like, shallow tasks are like email, administrative work, paperwork, signatures, but reviewing things, approving things. I would always try to fill up 65, 2/3 of my schedule every week with deep work, which to me, that was being around people, being around, being in meetings with people, learning about the business, trying to understand what was in their way of getting better results. That to me was deeper work, where I thought more, I got to use my brain. And what would happen is all of those shallow tasks, I would either just not do, I would delegate it, pawn it off to someone else, or I would save it until my Saturday mornings. I always worked Saturday mornings. I would go to the office for 4 hours. That was my shallow task day. That was where, if it was something I had to do, all of the stuff I just mentioned, I did it on Saturday mornings because there were no employees in the office, Frankie. So I wasn't robbing myself time with the people I needed to be with. I didn't expect them to work a Saturday morning, but I was an executive. I was paid and I had to get that stuff done. So I would just catch up on all of that, so that Monday morning, that's when most people do that. They do it Monday morning. But Monday morning was a bad time for me to just do shallow tasks all day because I had employees in the office. Again, I could go understand what was going on, listen, spend time where I needed to spend time. So I'm a big fan of schedule as much of the flow work as you can right into your calendar. It's no different than you setting important meetings first thing in the day. You get your workout done, you get your ass to work. You don't have time to do bullshit work to keep busy. You're involved in important meetings right out of the gate.
And I'm usually on a phone call as soon as the day starts, on my way into the office, like right after the gym, little time with the kids, get ready for work, a phone call, like 2 phone calls, and you're in the meetings and you're just rolling. And you always feel like you're behind on email because you're not letting it dictate your day. So I remember, how do you get good at not allowing busyness to rule you? What I will tell you is it's a constant struggle. So there's a few ways you can do it. There are courses and plans out there that you can use, or you can talk to resources. So I can remember calls with Ian in 2007, 2008, 2009, talking to him about how he did things. Like, his goal was to clean his email out by 4:00 Friday. And every week he would just get in there and just pound through it. And he wanted to be left with less than 10 emails that he would be done with on Friday. How do you set up your Monday? Do you do your agenda for the next week by the close of the week prior? So what I use is I usually do Sunday mornings, and I'm pretty clear. I kind of set a vision for my week, and I think about, like, okay, what do I want to talk about on my Monday morning call? What do I want to accomplish this week? And I had to do 2 different things, right? I think about, like, what's the mission and vision for the week, and what do I want to accomplish this week? And I usually boil it down to somewhere between 3 and 8 things. Some are small, but it's usually about 4 core things that you can really get done in your week. I learned something in my 20s. It's called the rapid planning method. And what R stands for is results oriented. P stands for purpose driven. And M is massive action plan. So in prepping for this interview, for this conversation, I thought about, like, what do I use? And I haven't thought about this in 20 years, but it's kind of like I used the analogy earlier with star in an interview. You need to think about, what am I spending my time on? Does it meet the R? Does it meet the P? Does it meet the M? And if it doesn't, it gets crossed off, or you focus on something that does move the needle. And like I said, it's a constant calibration. If you look around my office, I got papers everywhere. I got crap I need to do, but I push those things to the side and try and stay focused on moving forward.
So I think another thing you can do, Frankie, is just force yourself to quit. Have hard stops.
You're better at this than me.
Yeah, kids really helped me do it. And when I say kids, I mean, your kids still haven't got to the age yet. But for me, when your kids get to like sports age, I think you're going to be a lot better at this. So for me, it was when I started coaching youth sports, because the young kids have shitty times when they get to fields. So I'd have to leave the office at 4, and that was foreign to me. Before kids, and really when they were really young, I could work till 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. Sometimes I'd come home because there was no, I could work as long as I wanted because I wasn't rushing to get home to do anything. And I looked at it as, this is a time for me to make money. But what I never really realized was, by not having a hard stop and being able to stay in an office till 9 or 10 o'clock at night, I was really inefficient with my time. I was really sloppy with my time. I let people take advantage of my time in a lot of different ways. So once you started coaching sports and I had to leave at 4, it was amazing. I thought I was going to become less productive. I became more. I just quit doing a bunch of bullshit. And something you said earlier about, what you just cut some people, but you're only doing 17 closings a month, and you're wondering what's everyone so busy doing. It's very funny. That same thing happened to us. We went to a whole new staffing model in 2015 because our customer service was struggling. So before, we were asking people to carry 90, 100 customers at a time that were in some form of their house getting built. And we were doing okay, but not good enough. We nearly doubled our employee count, Frank, nearly doubled it. So people were now carrying 40 to 45 customers in their backlog. And at the end of the month, everyone was still running around with their hair on fire. And we looked at our overtime expenses. After doubling our employees, Frankie, you would think overtime would go to 0. But instead, overtime expenses went up. And we were like, what the hell? Like, the whole point of us doing this was for better service, better quality of life. But the answer to it was, people just had really shitty habits. They had terrible habits. So they were used to working until 6 or 7 at night, and they just expanded their work to keep fitting that old schedule. They were used to leaving at 6, so they kept leaving at 6. And we literally had to get to the point where we said, no overtime. You're all out at 5. We're logging you out. You can't log in to your computer, figure it out. And people were all pissed at first. You can't do this. And it was like, listen, we can do this. We doubled our payroll so that you didn't have to do this. We kicked them out. And finally, after a while, their schedule, they started getting more efficient. But when you add people, they don't get more efficient. They get less efficient, that I've found.
So we did something similar here. We had a department with 5 people in it, and it didn't run right. So I asked a bunch of questions, and I said, I'm going to kind of guess here, because a lot of good management is just gut or guess or best estimate based on what you know. And I said, I think I can run this department just as well with 3 people. And what we did is we very drastically reduced the staff by literally 2 out of 5. We got rid of 40% of the staff, and we run better because we have less people getting through things, and it's just working in such a way where that team is more efficient. Now, what we're talking about in today's society is busyness and kind of an excuse. But there's a quote that I just love. Benjamin Franklin once said, if you want something done, ask a busy person. There's truth to this statement, because after all, the busier we are, the better we manage our time. Busy people always get more done in the day because they waste less time. So it's a dated quote at this point. We've used busyness as an excuse, but people who are, I think if Benjamin Franklin had a second chance at this 200 years later, you might say productive people.
Yeah, it's the most productive person.
People.
They're productive for a reason.
That's it.
They work a lot of hours. They work hard, but they're productive for a reason. They're organized and they produce things. I think another thing, Frankie, is if you want your team to be efficient, you need to be efficient with your calendar. If you're one thing I realized, I learned the wrong way. So at GE, everyone stayed in the office until the corner office light went off, and then we left. No, everyone, I can remember this feeling very strongly. I wanted the senior executive in our office to see my car when he went to the parking lot. I never wanted him to not see it. I would leave after him, even if I wasn't getting a lot done. But, now that I'm in my 40s, Frankie, I'm asking myself, why was that senior executive in the office till 8 or 9 o'clock every night? Like, he had a wife, he had kids, he was in his 50s. How inefficient was he? Or was he doing it because his manager stayed in the office till 8 or 9 and might make a phone call to him at 8 to see if he was still in there? So to me, that creates a very inefficient office because people are just staying late because that's part of the cultural norm. I was very fortunate to go to NVR where the executives there were about production. They were about Bill, Paul, Ken Glassmacher, Rainer Altman, Bob Henley. None of them were ever in the office late. Everyone I just mentioned was never in the office at 8 o'clock at night. Like, a handful of them were gone at 4 every day. But when they were there, they got shit done, and none of them expected me to be in the office there. They expected me to get results. Paul Seville, the CEO of that company, valued results way more than hours worked. He was about, are you getting things produced?
This is a really cool story. They hired Bosco from Toll Brothers, right? So talking about modeling the right behavior, and this is a story from, I don't know, I was in my mid to high 20s. And they brought in this executive from a different home builder. And this different home builder was famous for the CEO calling at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, requiring people to still be at their desks. And the company is a good company. They have good metrics, but NVR is significantly better than them. And we kind of all giggle about this company because they're just egomaniacs, but they're not smart. And Ken, who Ian and I both look up to as a mentor, walked down the hall, saw this guy in his office at 6:30, turned his light off and said, "Go home. Go home." Awesome story. He goes, basically the message was this: get your stuff done during working hours and get the hell out of here.
I had a same story. I called Macaulay, who was with Ryan Holmes when I started, and this was like my second month. And I'm like, John, there's no one here at 6 o'clock. The whole office of McLean is empty. And I'm here and I'm trying to find some stuff to do. And he's like, dude, go home. It's not GE. Like, no one cares if you're there right now. In fact, you'll probably catch some shit for sending emails at 6 or 7 o'clock at night. Go home. And that was good modeling. It was about, NVR was an absolute meritocracy, and they did it well. I paid on production. The bonuses were all based on results. Everything was based on driving results and not hours worked. And I just always loved that. And I think the last thing I'll just say, Frankie, is more people need to schedule white space into their calendar. So right now, I have 2 management programs wrapping up at the same time. And when I wrap it up, I do a final one-on-one. So I have 20 people trying to get in my calendar in the next 2 weeks. I went and blocked off an hour and a half each of my afternoons because I like to go take a walk. I go out on the trail, I walk, I put my headphones in, and I make phone calls. That's kind of my white space time to just think. And it's during the middle of the day, and that's fine. I went and booked it in because I didn't want anyone to double book. I don't want to lose that time, because that thinking time always, I get into a flow state. I listen to podcasts. I call people. I call you sometimes. I call people I need to follow up on and do things with. And I'm not distracted by anything. I'm not distracted by my TV. I'm not distracted by my computer, my email, my phone. I schedule in white space where I can just think. And that helps me be more productive and think about how to make more money.
So I'll close it with 2 things that I think are pretty interesting, right? So I do something similar to you. How do I force some peace and quiet into my day? I had a business coach. I worked with him 4 or 5 years ago. We re-engaged him a couple of years ago, but I have this sticky note on my desk. And the sticky note says this: Number 2 says more coaching, issue stuck. How can I help? Promotion from self. But the thing that's up front is block my time thinking and reading. And I've had this note since 2019. It's probably the 3rd copy of that note. But what I do now on Thursdays is I don't come to the office. Now, I told a story to Ian a couple of days ago where someone wants to sell me 135 houses, and the only time I could get together with him was Thursday. I interrupted my schedule for that. But my Thursday, I have 3 calls scheduled, and it rotates. And all I do is I walk my neighborhood. I talk on the phone. I drink coffee. I'm outside, and I'm just making phone calls. But that's my time to both think, reflect, and get on the phone. It's similar to what Ian does. But it's my time for me to be able to kind of process. If there's something I really need to chew on, I'm like, I'm going to deal with that on Thursday because I don't come into the office. And I've got a nice enough backyard. I sit in a chair underneath a tree sometimes. I leave my phone in the house. I just bring a notepad with me and I just work on things because I have to do that. I've got tons of phone calls and emails and texts. I force it. Speaking of forcing it, you don't know I'm doing it 1:50 today, Ian?
What are you doing, broski?
I'm going to see Air all by myself.
I love it. That's awesome.
I
You already
can't
put it in there. There's nothing cooler than being an old man who goes to the movies by yourself in the middle of the day.
My
I love
calendar
doing
just
that.
says the following: from 1:30 to 4 o'clock, it just says Frank Air.
It's going to be you in there with like 4 octogenarians. Like it's only
I can
really
only
old
hope.
people
I
of
can only
130.
hope. I can
Yeah,
only
there's
hope.
hardly anyone in there. It's fantastic. Turn your phone off, get some popcorn. It's a good little way to spend your afternoon.
I cannot wait.
That is absolutely amazing. That's one of the beauties of having your own business. You work a lot of hours, you're busy, sure, but you can kind of go do some of those things and get out and do it. I would have never thought when I was working for a Fortune 500 company, I would have never thought to leave in the middle of the afternoon and walk for an hour and a half and make phone calls. Like
No.
I was just on my desk. I was staying busy. I wanted to be seen as working hard. Like now I protect that time with my life, kind of like your Thursdays. And I'm irritated when I don't have a day or two of just blank space time where I can go do some of that. So John Wooden's famous quote on this is never mistake activity for achievement. John Wooden, the great Purdue University graduate, of course, how everyone remembers and knows him. A good way for us to finish this one off. I don't know if this was a productive use of our time, Frankie, or we're just keeping from being idle, but I sure as hell did enjoy it, big guy.
I felt very busy during this hour, Ian.
You felt this was busy work for you. This was not making you a lot of money for your business. Hopefully our next call absolutely does that instead. If you are new to this show and you liked this, smash that subscribe button wherever you listen to us, and we sure would appreciate it if you give us a 5-star review with some nice comments so Frankie and I know who the hell you are. Frankie, stay busy today, buddy.
Good talking to you, Ian.